The mug handle was slick from condensation, and my thumb kept slipping against it as I tried to steady my hand. Outside the office window, the morning light came in sharp. Too white, too early. I was still trying to process what had just come out of my manager's mouth. "You're too reliable, Sam." He'd said it like a compliment, like being dependable was a flaw he could smile through. The words hung in that recycled air between us, the faint hum of the HVAC swallowing my silence. I nodded, because what else do you do when your boss tells you your consistency is the reason you'll never move up? I'd been with Thompson and Rayner Logistics for almost 7 years. Started as a junior coordinator, promoted once after 3 years when my predecessor quit mid-quarter. Since then, my job had become the quiet glue that kept the place from falling apart. Inventory reports, vendor calls, fleet schedules, order disputes. If something got dropped, I picked it up. I was the guy people emailed when something went wrong and nobody wanted to take the blame. At first, I took pride in that. My dad used to say, "Be the guy they can count on, and you'll always have a place." But what he didn't tell me was that the place might stay the same forever. It started 2 months before that meeting. A new regional operations manager named Elliot Shaw had joined us, MBA from Purdue, sharp suit, liked to talk in metaphors that sounded stolen from LinkedIn. He made a lot of noise about efficiency culture and operational trust metrics. People ate it up. The guy had a presence. He started calling informal coffee chats with select team members, the kind that happened behind closed doors, where no one knew who was getting groomed for what. I didn't get an invite, but Derek, the guy I trained 3 years earlier, did. "Man, I think he's really looking at me for a project lead spot," Derek said one afternoon, spinning in his chair like a kid who just found out about Christmas early. I smiled, tried to mean it. "That's good. You've been putting in the hours." He shrugged. "Honestly, Sam, I learned everything from you. You made it easy." He said it like a thank you, but it landed like a warning. I had built my own replacement without knowing it. The meeting that morning was supposed to be my annual review. I came in with a bullet point sheet. Achievements, metrics, client feedback. I'd hit every deadline, saved the company close to 30 grand by renegotiating warehouse contracts. Elliot skimmed the paper once and set it aside. "Sam, this is all solid work," he said. "No one doubts your consistency. You're one of the most dependable people here." Then came the pause, the kind that signals a pivot. But sometimes reliability can limit visibility. We want leaders who can take risks, think dynamically. You tend to stabilize things. That's great, but it's not promotable in our current framework. My throat went dry. "So what does that mean exactly?" He smiled. "Corporate, polite, rehearsed. It means we need you right where you are." Right where I am. That phrase replayed in my head during every shift after that. It followed me home, into the shower, into the quiet moments where the apartment light flickered and my dinner went cold. There's a strange ache that comes when you realize loyalty isn't valued, just consumed. I started noticing things I'd ignored before. How people clocked out early while I finished their reports. How credit for my suggestions ended up in someone else's presentation. How urgent always seemed to mean, "Let Sam fix it." I'd made myself essential, but invisible. 2 weeks later, something small broke the surface. We were finalizing the quarterly route optimization report. Basically, a spreadsheet that determined how efficiently our trucks ran across the Midwest. I'd spent nights perfecting it, checking route overlaps, calculating cost savings to the cent. That morning, I found out the report had been sent to corporate under Derek's name. I walked over to his desk, keeping my voice calm. "Hey, did you send the final optimization file yesterday?" He nodded, not meeting my eyes. "Yeah, Elliot wanted it by end of day. You were out grabbing lunch." I left it labeled draft. You know that wasn't final. He spun his chair toward me, hands up. Look, I didn't think it was a big deal. I just attached it and sent it over. Elliot knows we worked on it together. We. I'd done 90% of it, but sure. We. Later that afternoon, an email went out congratulating Derek's exceptional analytical initiative. Elliot had even CC'd the department. People clapped in the break room. I sat there with my stale sandwich, pretending it didn't sting. That night, I stayed late. Not out of spite, but out of habit. The office emptied, lights dimmed on motion sensors, and the hum of the vending machine filled the silence. I stared at the screen. My name was in the metadata of the report. Every formula, every timestamp. The Excel file carried my fingerprints. That's when the idea started forming. Not out of anger, but precision. If reliability was my curse, maybe it could be theirs too. The first move was subtle. I started documenting everything, emails, edits, timestamps. Not to expose anyone, not yet, just to see the system I'd been propping up. I realized how dependent they were on the illusion that everything just worked. Elliot's flashy new initiatives only functioned because I quietly fixed the back-end messes no one wanted to admit existed. Invoices misdated by one day, carrier routes with duplicate IDs, expense sheets missing GL codes. I handled it all before it reached him, so I stopped. The next Monday, I came in and did exactly what was assigned. No more, no less. By Tuesday, minor chaos bloomed. Shipping reports delayed. Vendor responses bottlenecked. Elliot's inbox flooded with urgent follow-ups. He called me in. Sam, what's going on with the Midwest tracking sync? Corporate's asking. I kept my tone neutral. I sent my portion Friday, still waiting on confirmations from accounting. He frowned. Normally you chase those down. Trying to respect the new workflow structure you implemented, I said. Delegating more, right? His jaw tightened. Right. That was the first crack. By the second week, the department was a carousel of mild panic. Everyone was double-checking what I used to just quietly fix. Meetings dragged. Deadlines slipped. Derek stopped swinging his chair. His inbox was burning. Meanwhile, I stayed calm, sipping my coffee, keeping my notes. People began realizing that my reliability hadn't been passive. It was active maintenance. Without it, their whole rhythm wobbled. One Friday, Elliot asked me to stay after hours. The office lights buzzed with that low fluorescent hum that makes everything feel sterile. Sam, he said, pacing, we need to talk. There's been a noticeable decline in workflow consistency. I nodded. I've noticed that too. He paused, squinting slightly. Your metrics are still fine, but your team synergy scores have dropped. Team synergy, I repeated. That's the metric that measures how well I clean up other people's mistakes, right? He sighed. Don't make this adversarial. I'm just trying to get us aligned again. I let the silence stretch. Then, maybe the issue isn't reliability. Maybe it's how it's used. He didn't like that. I could see it in his tightened jaw. Sam, I need you to be part of the solution, not the problem. Funny, I said, picking up my mug. That's what I thought I was doing. That night, I sat in my car in the parking lot for nearly an hour. The lot lights hummed above me, soft orange bleeding through the windshield. I didn't feel vindicated, just tired. But under that fatigue, something new stirred. Clarity. They'd built an entire ecosystem around my predictability. So if they saw reliability as a liability, I'd show them what happens when the liability walks away. The next week, I drafted something quiet, a transfer request, not a resignation, just a move to corporate quality assurance, a team upstairs that audited processes across departments. I'd done cross-functional work with them before. They respected my precision. I didn't tell anyone. Submitted it through the internal portal, added a short note. Interested in joining QA to improve interdepartmental reliability analytics. The irony made me smile. 2 days later, HR called me in. They said the QA director had personally approved my transfer. Start date, next quarter. Salary, 15% higher. Elliot found out later that afternoon. He walked over to my desk, that managerial half grin barely holding. You put in a transfer? Yes, I said. I figured it aligns better with my skill set. He leaned in slightly. You know, moving upstairs might change how people here see you. I met his eyes. That's kind of the point. What he didn't know yet was that QA's first project for the next quarter was a workflow dependency audit, specifically targeting inefficiencies in regional operations. Elliot's department, the one where everything only worked because I quietly made it so. I spent my last few weeks downstairs documenting every pattern, every untracked fix, every shortcut management took to make numbers look good. When the QA team onboarded me, they handed me the audit plan. And there it was. Region 3 operations, Elliot's territory. Sam, my new lead said, you know this area better than anyone. We'll rely on you to point out where the weak spots are. I smiled, tucking my old ID badge into my pocket. Yeah, I said, I know exactly where they are. By the time the audit kicked off, Derek was already floundering. His initiative reports didn't hold up under scrutiny. Half the metrics he'd presented had been inflated by my unseen corrections. Corporate emails began trickling in, CCing QA for clarification. Elliot's LinkedIn-style confidence started cracking in real time. He called me once after I'd moved upstairs. Hey, Sam, just wondering if you could clarify some of the routing data structures from last quarter. I could hear the strain in his voice. Sure, I said, but I'll have to loop in QA so everything's transparent. There was a pause. Right, he said softly. Of course. I didn't enjoy it, not in the schadenfreude sense. It wasn't revenge, it was revelation. They had built their success on someone they called too reliable. And now that reliability was auditing them. In the final weeks of the audit's first phase, something interesting happened. People started asking how things had stayed functional before. Reports showed that over 60% of the smooth operations metrics had been supported by unrecorded labor. Mine. QA flagged it. Corporate requested documentation. When they pulled the system logs, every fix traced back to my login ID. My reliability had become their liability. Elliot tried to frame it as a systems oversight. Corporate didn't buy it. They saw it for what it was, dependency without acknowledgement. By the time the quarter ended, HR quietly reassigned him to a lateral consulting role. Derek was demoted to analyst. I didn't celebrate. I just clocked in, logged my QA findings, and went home. Sometimes, the most effective retaliation is just letting the truth stand tall enough that no one can step around it. But that's not where it ended. Because a month later, something unexpected landed on my desk. An internal request from corporate asking for a full reliability framework proposal for all departments. They wanted me to design it. And the first line I wrote on that blank page was, "Reliability is not a weakness. It's what exposes who's pretending to lead." The first Monday after the audit, the office felt different. Not louder, just off rhythm. You could hear the unevenness in the way conversations started and stopped, how doors closed a little harder than usual. Word travels fast in corporate spaces, even faster when someone like Elliot Shaw falls out of favor. People who used to nod confidently at him in the hallway suddenly looked past him, as if eye contact might implicate them too. I knew that look. I'd lived under it for years. But now, it was like watching the storm from higher ground. The QA division was on the top floor of the Thompson and Rayner building, an open-plan space with glass partitions and whiteboards filled with numbers no one downstairs ever saw. It smelled like dry erase markers and burnt coffee. My new manager, Rachel Nguyen, greeted me on my first official day with a firm handshake and a notebook labeled Process Integrity. "Glad to have someone who actually knows how the machine works," she said, handing me a QA badge. "Downstairs, they talk about systems. Up here, we look at what really happens between the lines." I nodded. "That's where the truth usually hides." She smiled, like she'd been waiting to hear exactly that. For the first week, I mostly listened. The team was small, 6 of us, and everyone had a specialty: compliance audits, digital systems, vendor chain analysis. Mine was workflow dependency, though what that really meant was spotting the human scaffolding that keeps bad systems from collapsing. Most people think audits are about numbers. They're not. They're about behavior. Every cell in a spreadsheet has a person behind it, someone who decided whether to follow a rule or bend it. And bending rules was practically an art form downstairs. On my third day, Rachel asked me to join a meeting with corporate oversight. A woman named Janet Park, sharp voice, older, had that calm but deadly tone that people in real authority carry. "Mr. Ellis from the executive board wants a deeper look into regional ops, especially Shaw's tenure," she said, glancing at me. "You worked under him, correct?" "Yes," I said carefully. "For about a year." "Then you're our inside view," she replied. "Your findings were illuminating. We need to know how far the dependency problem goes, not just the reports, how culture allowed it to exist." Culture. That word hit harder than I expected, because that's what it was. A culture built around quiet people like me, making loud people look good. I told her I'd find the evidence, and for the first time, I felt like my reliability had real teeth. The deeper I dug, the clearer the pattern became. Every polished efficiency metric Elliot had bragged about was propped up by invisible corrections, unpaid overtime, and undocumented fixes from a handful of staff. Some of them didn't even realize how much they were covering. They just did it to keep things moving. There was Marcy, who rerouted supplier invoices by hand when the automation broke. Julian, who redid fuel receipts weekly to match mismatched carrier codes. Linda, who stayed late every Thursday to reformat inventory logs before the Monday report. Each of them had been praised as consistent. Each of them overlooked for promotion. Sound familiar? I started interviewing them quietly, one by one, under the guise of workflow evaluation. I didn't record anything at first, just listened. "Why do you fix it yourself instead of reporting it?" I asked Marcy one evening. She shrugged. "If I don't fix it, it becomes a mess for everyone, and management doesn't listen. They just want the numbers clean." "And what happens if you take a day off?" Her laugh was dry. "Then the numbers get ugly." That line stuck with me, because it was the same dynamic, different faces, same story. The company had built its reputation on invisible reliability, and that invisibility was bleeding people dry. By midweek, I had enough data to build what I called the reliability map. It was a visual chart: blue lines for documented workflows, red lines for undocumented ones. Within an hour, the screen looked like a circulatory system with clogged arteries. Rachel leaned over my desk as I scrolled through it. "Jesus, Sam, this is damning." "It's just the truth," I said. "Every red line is someone doing work that doesn't officially exist. If any of them quit tomorrow, the system would stall within a week." She crossed her arms. "And management had no idea?" "Oh, they knew," I said. "They just called it dedication." By Friday, Rachel had me present the findings to corporate oversight. It wasn't a flashy meeting, just a gray conference room, filtered coffee, a projector humming like a nervous heartbeat. But the air had weight. Elliot wasn't invited, though everyone knew the audit had his fingerprints all over it. I started with a slide showing a single sentence: "Reliability without recognition is exploitation." Then I walked them through the data. one quiet dependency at a time. I showed how a single unacknowledged employee had saved the company hundreds of hours by catching invoicing errors. How my own behind the scenes corrections had prevented a compliance fine the year before. By the end, you could have heard the click of a pen cap drop. Janet leaned forward. "Mr. Carter," she said, "nobody up here called me Sam. What would happen if these dependencies failed?" "They already are," I said. "You just don't see it yet." After the meeting, Rachel clapped me on the shoulder. "You just made yourself indispensable." I shook my head. "That's what they said last time." She gave me a look. "This time you'll make it on your terms." The next month rolled in like a slow tide. QA's recommendations started landing on executive desks. New accountability frameworks, cross-departmental dependency audits, quarterly reliability evaluations. But beneath all that policy talk, something more human started shifting. People downstairs began hearing whispers that the audit had changed everything. Some thanked me quietly over Slack. Others just watched, waiting to see if I'd get burned for speaking up. Elliot avoided me entirely. Derek tried once, to catch up over coffee. I didn't reply. One evening, after most of the QA floor had cleared out, Rachel stopped by my desk again. "You've been working on that reliability proposal draft, right?" she asked. "Almost done, Ace," I said. "I've been mapping it to actual staff behaviors instead of theoretical metrics." She leaned against the desk. "When you're finished, I want to include your name on it. Front page, full authorship." That froze me for a second. No one had ever said that to me before. "Why?" I asked. "Because people like you built this company's spine," she said. "Time they learned what that looks like." The next week, I finalized the proposal. 50 pages, graphs, interviews, cross-links between invisible tasks and profit margins. It was the kind of thing that could actually change how the company valued its workers. At the bottom of the cover page, for the first time in my career, my name stood alone. Samuel Carter, Reliability Framework Architect. I should have been proud, and I was, partly. But pride has a quiet twin called apprehension. Because once you expose a system built on silence, you can't unsee who profits from it, and those people don't go quietly. It started with a subtle rumor. Someone downstairs mentioned that a QA leak was circulating, that the audit made management look too vulnerable. Another day, someone hinted that certain senior managers felt personally targeted. By Friday, I got an anonymous message in my inbox. "Careful, Carter. Reliability cuts both ways." No name. Just that. I stared at it for a long time. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. Monday morning, I walked into work and found an envelope on my chair. Inside, a printed copy of one of my QA reports, with red pen circling my notes. Beside a paragraph highlighting management negligence, someone had written in the margin, "This is conjecture, not fact." The handwriting was Elliot's. He must have gotten access somehow. That same afternoon, HR pinged me for a clarification meeting. The HR rep, a woman named Grace, smiled tightly when I walked in. "Sam, we're doing a quick review of internal document handling. Some of your reports were flagged as having unverified statements. Just a routine check." "Who flagged them?" "Anonymous," she said. Of course. She clicked through a few files, each with sections highlighted, the same ones that implicated Elliot's leadership failures. "Did you have source evidence for these?" she asked. "Yes, system logs. I can forward them." "Please do. We just need to make sure everything aligns with policy." The word policy hit like a familiar echo. That's what they always hid behind when they didn't want to admit what was wrong. I sent the logs, but before leaving I asked, "Grace, off record, am I being set up for something?" She looked at me too long before answering. Not yet, she said, but you should be careful who you trust. That night, I stayed late again. Old habits die hard. The office was quiet, just the faint hum of the vending machine down the hall. I opened my email logs and traced the document trail. Sure enough, the original files had been downloaded 3 times from an internal link. Twice by QA staff. Once by someone using Elliot's old admin credentials. He shouldn't have access anymore, which meant someone gave it to him. The next morning, I brought it to Rachel. She skimmed through the access logs, her face tightening. We just changed system permissions last week. Someone bypassed it. I leaned forward. Someone who knew how. She tapped the desk. I'll take this up to oversight. You keep your head down, finish your framework. Don't get dragged into whatever politics are happening. But it was already too late for that. When you expose a flaw, the flaw starts fighting back. That week turned into a quiet Cold War. Elliot avoided direct contact, but started leaking little doubts into hallway conversations about bias in the audit, overreach from QA, personal agendas. Meanwhile, corporate was still reviewing my framework proposal. Every morning I checked my inbox like someone waiting for a verdict. Then on Thursday it arrived. Proposal approved for board review. Presentation requested next month. Author, Samuel Carter. My stomach dropped. Not because I was scared to present, but because I knew exactly who that would threaten. When you build your reputation on being invisible, visibility feels like exposure. I used to think reliability meant being dependable. Now I realized it also meant being dangerous, to people who only thrived when others stayed quiet. So I decided I wouldn't whisper anymore. If they wanted to test how far reliability could go, I'd show them. Because when you spend your whole career holding the ceiling up, you eventually learn exactly how to make it fall, slowly, precisely, and without leaving fingerprints. The first thing I noticed that morning was how quiet the building felt. Not the good kind of quiet, the kind that feels like something has been rearranged while you weren't looking. When I logged into my workstation, half my project folders were missing. The shortcut to my QA framework proposal, the same one I'd spent months refining, was gone from the shared drive. I opened my email. No notifications, no meeting invites, nothing. That's when I knew. Someone was trying to make me disappear again. By noon, Rachel called me into her office. Her expression was unreadable, half concern, half exhaustion. Sam, she said, we need to talk about something unusual. She turned her monitor toward me. It showed the shared drive audit log. The proposal file had been deleted at 7:43 a.m. from a remote login. The user ID? R-I-N-G-U-Y-N, Rachel's credentials. She rubbed her temples. That's not me. My account was compromised. Elliot? I asked. She hesitated. Could be. Could also be someone upstairs. These credentials have admin override. I stared at the screen. That file wasn't just text. It was evidence. Every link, every chart tied invisible labor to corporate negligence. If someone wanted to bury it, they just had. I didn't say much. I just walked out of her office and took the elevator to the ground floor. The walls were mirrored, and for a second, I caught my own reflection. Tie slightly loose, eyes hollow from too many late nights. That's what reliability looks like after years of being tested. It stops looking like strength and starts looking like endurance. When the doors opened, I didn't head outside. I went to IT support. The tech guy, Malik, was one of those quiet geniuses who lived on energy drinks and noise-canceling headphones. I'd helped him once last year when a vendor dispute had messed up his contract renewal, so he owed me one. Hey Malik, I said, I need you to look at something sensitive, off the record. He arched an eyebrow. How sensitive? Like, career ending, if I'm right. He sighed, set his headphones down, and rolled his chair closer. All right, give me your system ID. Within minutes, He'd pulled up the back-end logs. Okay, your file was deleted by a clone session, he said. Same IP range as upper management. Looks like someone piggybacked Rachel's credentials through a secondary authentication relay. So, corporate access? He nodded slowly. Could be the compliance director, or someone they're covering for. Then he added, but the good news? Backups run every 6 hours. I can restore the version from 2 a.m. My chest eased for the first time in days. Do it, I said. He grinned. Already did. When the file blinked back onto my desktop, I didn't open it right away. I just stared at it for a second. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Just resolute. They'd tried to erase me quietly, same as before. Only this time, I had the tools, the access, and the proof. Reliability, it turns out, makes you very dangerous when you stop being polite about it. Over the next week, I rebuilt my defenses. I mirrored my hard drive, encrypted my key files, printed physical copies of every audit document. I even mailed one sealed copy to my brother's house out of state, just in case. Rachel was furious about the breach. This wasn't a hack, Shida, she said. It was an inside job. We'll escalate it. But I told her not to. Yet. Let's see what they do next, I said. People show their real hands when they think they've silenced you. The corporate board meeting for the reliability framework was scheduled for the following Tuesday. The presentation invite still listed me as the author. But the day before, something shifted. I got an email from Janet Park, the corporate oversight head who'd first recruited me. Sam, for tomorrow's presentation, the board has decided to have Rachel deliver the proposal on behalf of QA. You'll provide data support. I read that line 3 times. It wasn't framed as a demotion, just a decision. But I knew exactly what it was. Containment. They didn't want my voice in the room. Rachel came to my desk later, guilt written all over her face. I didn't agree to it, she said quietly. They think it'll look cleaner if management presents it. Cleaner, I repeated, as in less human. She sighed. You know how they are. They'll take your work, wrap it in neutral language, and hope the politics fade out of view. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Then I'll just make sure the politics show up anyway. That night, I stayed in the office long after the lights dimmed. The city outside was pale orange and restless. I opened the proposal one more time, then attached something new, a short hidden appendix at the end, a list of every invisible worker whose labor the company had relied on. Names, hours, contributions, uncredited fixes. It wasn't dramatized, just data, line by line. Then I locked the appendix with a soft encryption key only accessible by the board members' review portal. If they opened the document, they'd see the truth. If they didn't, that silence would speak just as loud. The next morning, the boardroom was all glass and chrome. 15 executives sat around the long oval table, a city skyline behind them like a painting. Rachel stood at the head, perfectly composed. I sat 2 seats behind, laptop open, feeding her slide transitions. She started strong. Charts, case studies, efficiency metrics. The kind of language executives love. But halfway through, Janet interrupted. Rachel, she said, this framework references undocumented workflows in several departments. How reliable are these sources? Rachel looked at me. Then she said, you should ask Samuel Carter. He collected the data. All eyes turned to me. I stood up slowly. My voice didn't shake. They're reliable, I said, because they're based on real human behavior, the kind that keeps this company running while no one notices. Janet nodded. Explain. I clicked to the next slide. The hidden appendix prompt appeared. Every blue line is an approved workflow. Every red line is an invisible one. Each red line represents someone who's saving you time, money, and credibility, without credit or pay. The room went still. These people don't need praise, I said. They need recognition. Because when they stop showing up, so does your efficiency. When I finished, the silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy. You could feel the shift. One of the senior VPs cleared his throat. "This is significant," he said. "We had no idea the scope was this wide." Janet turned to me. "Mr. Carter, if we formalize this framework, what do you propose as the next step?" "Transparency," I said. "Not in PR language, real transparency. Documented labor, fair evaluation, shared credit." She nodded once. "We'll deliberate." The meeting adjourned quietly. Rachel gave me a subtle smile as we walked out. "You handled that like a pro." I exhaled. "Feels like the first time I've actually been heard." But the relief didn't last long. That evening, I got another anonymous email. No subject, just a single line. "You think you've won. Wait until payroll sees your conflict of interest." Attached was a file, one of my internal QA drafts, with my name and timestamp embedded next to a clause about compensation discrepancy reporting. Someone was trying to make it look like I'd falsified pay data. The next morning, HR called again. Grace's voice was softer this time, almost sympathetic. "Sam, there's been an allegation that you manipulated audit data. We just need to review your access logs." "I didn't manipulate anything." "I know," she said quietly, "but you'll need to prove it." I left her office with my stomach knotted. The air felt heavier than usual, the kind that presses against your chest when you're standing at the edge of something sharp. I went straight back to Malik in IT. He scanned through the system in silence, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Then he looked up. "They cloned your system ID again," he said, "but they used an old timestamp, like they backdated an edit. Thing is, it's sloppy, metadata mismatch." "Can you show that?" He grinned. "Already screen capped it, twice." He printed the logs, signed them, and handed me a copy. "Always hated how they treat people like you," he said. "Keep this safe." I walked straight to Rachel's office. "They're framing me," I said, dropping the papers on her desk. She flipped through them, her jaw tightening. "They're scared, Sam. The board liked your presentation. If they implement this framework, half the senior structure has to justify years of unpaid dependency. So they're trying to stain the messenger." "Exactly." And she exhaled and leaned back. "Give me the logs. I'll send them to oversight." I hesitated. "If you send them, this gets political fast." She met my eyes. "It already is." The next 48 hours were a blur. Internal reviews, forwarded emails, urgent CCs, and Slack channels lighting up like warning sirens. Then, just like that, silence. By Friday afternoon, an internal memo went out company-wide. QA integrity audit completed. No evidence of data manipulation found. System vulnerabilities identified and corrected. That was corporate speak for "we caught them." Elliott's consulting contract was quietly terminated. A few mid-level managers were reassigned. HR scrubbed the incident from the record, but people knew. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that I'd only survived because I'd finally learned how to weaponize the one thing they used against me: consistency. They called me too reliable. They were right. Because reliability, when it's deliberate, becomes control. Every email, every timestamp, every quiet fix I'd ever made became proof of who I really was, the guy who saw the whole machine and knew which gear would grind first. Rachel called me into her office that evening before I left. The light outside had gone soft and amber. "Sam," she said, "the board's approving a pilot implementation of your framework in 2 regions. They want you to lead it." I blinked. "Me?" She smiled. "You've earned it. And this time, No one's calling you too reliable. They're calling you essential. For a moment, I couldn't speak. All those nights of fixing other people's mistakes, of being the quiet constant, it had finally turned into something visible. But as I packed up my desk, I noticed the envelope tucked under my keyboard. No name, no logo. Inside, a folded piece of paper. You change the system, Carter, but the system always recalibrates. Watch your back. No signature, just like before. That night, as I walked to my car under the flickering streetlight, I thought about what Rachel had said about visibility and power and the cost of both. They thought I'd played their game, but I hadn't. I'd rewritten the rulebook. Because the truth about being too reliable is this: once people realize they can't control you anymore, they start to fear what you might do next. And I was only getting started. The first sign that things had really changed came not from an email, but from the way people started looking at me. Not avoidance anymore. Calculation. Every corridor conversation paused when I passed. Every team meeting had that polite shift where someone tried not to sound defensive. It wasn't fear exactly. It was awareness. I'd become the man they couldn't ignore anymore. The quiet one who'd forced the system to admit it needed him. By the time the Reliability Framework pilot launched, I'd been promoted officially to program lead for the 2 trial regions. The email announcement came from corporate communications, all polished phrasing and forced enthusiasm. Samuel Carter has been appointed Reliability Program Lead, overseeing efficiency transparency for Regions 1 and 3. His analytical integrity and commitment to operational fairness have set a new standard. I read that line, analytical integrity, and almost laughed. 6 months ago, those same people had called me too reliable. Now I was a standard. The first region to adopt the pilot was Cleveland, one of our mid-tier logistics centers. The facility itself was massive, rows of concrete warehouses, forklifts buzzing through aisles of shrink-wrapped pallets. The air smelled like diesel, cardboard, and cold metal. I flew out there for the rollout, accompanied by 2 QA staffers and a regional HR rep named Dana. Elliot's replacement, Marcus Hale, met us at the gate. You could tell instantly he was cut from a different cloth. Ex-military precision, clean handshake, didn't waste words. "Carter," he said, nodding once. "Heard a lot about you." "Hopefully good things, Hoche," I said. He smirked. "Depends who you ask." Inside, the plant manager led us through the daily workflow. As we moved, I watched the small things, the half-written clipboard notes, the sticky labels stacked near a jammed scanner, the worker who quietly fixed a machine mid-route without logging it. Reliability lives in those details. Always has. I took notes, not for metrics, but for patterns. You could tell who carried the weight here. The old-timers who'd stopped waiting for recognition. One of them, a guy named Luis, stopped me near the loading bay. "You're the audit guy, right?" "Something like that." He grinned. "Good. Maybe you'll tell management how half these efficiency systems only work because we double-check them ourselves." I smiled back. "That's exactly the point." He didn't believe me at first. Most don't. That evening, after the site tour, Marcus pulled me into his office. He closed the door and sat across from me, elbows on the desk. "I read your framework," he said. "Impressive stuff. But you know how this goes. The board loves new ideas until they cost something." "I'm aware," I said. "That's why I'm collecting data before they can twist the narrative." He studied me for a moment. "You've got a quiet kind of fight in you, Carter. Not loud, not showy, but it cuts deep." "Reliability does that," I said. He chuckled softly. "Well, if you need someone on the ground who's not afraid of shaking things up, I'm with you." It was the first genuine alliance I'd had in years. Back at headquarters, the numbers started to speak for themselves. Within 2 months, The pilot regions showed a measurable drop in process errors, not because people worked more, but because tasks were finally visible. When workers were credited for their hidden contributions, morale climbed. Overtime complaints went down. Corporate liked that. Less HR paperwork, fewer quiet resignations. What they didn't like was how often my reports mentioned leadership accountability. The pushback came quietly, the way rot seeps through wood, budget delays, scheduling conflicts, executive meetings suddenly postponed due to resource allocation. And then there was the email from finance requesting clarification on the framework's cost-benefit analysis. Rachel called me into her office. "They're trying to stall," she said flatly. "They're waiting for a reason to scale this back." I leaned back in the chair. "Then we give them no reason." She raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "Meaning," I said, "we make the workers our witnesses. Every process improvement logged. Every saved hour documented by them. Not us. Them." Her expression softened. "You're turning reliability into collective proof." "Exactly. You can't bury a system when 100 people are keeping score." And it worked. 3 months in, Cleveland's report was so airtight, even finance had to acknowledge it. The framework had cut redundancy costs by 12%. Corporate sent a congratulatory memo, sterile, of course, but this time it included my name and the phrase strategic innovation. That memo circulated everywhere. I started getting calls from other regions asking, "When can we get the program?" It felt surreal. Like walking through a building you used to clean after hours, only now they've etched your name into the wall. But for every bit of progress, the shadow followed. That anonymous note hadn't been idle. The next time it showed up, it wasn't paper. It was a voicemail. Unknown number, distorted voice. "You're not fixing the system, Carter. You're exposing people who built it. That never ends well." I saved the message, sent it to Malik, who still owed me a few favors. A day later, he called back. Voice was scrambled through a VoIP relay, untraceable. But guess what? It originated from inside the company's internal network. Which department? Finance. I didn't tell Rachel right away. Instead, I started tracing my own line back. Every file I'd uploaded, every internal memo, every person who'd had access to the framework data. That's when I found something odd. A recurring pattern of file pings from a user ID that shouldn't exist anymore. Isha archived. Elliot Shaw. Someone had restored his old credentials to monitor the rollout data. I confronted Rachel the next morning. "Someone's using Elliot's old login. It's being masked as a system archive access." Her expression hardened. "That's impossible. It deactivated all his credentials." "Then someone reactivated them." She rubbed her forehead. "Jesus, why? He's gone." "Maybe not as far gone as we think of," I said. "He's too proud to fade quietly." She looked at me then, eyes sharp. "You think he's the one behind the threats?" "I think he's got help." We brought it to Malik again. He confirmed what I already suspected. An internal user had cloned Elliot's profile and used it as a backdoor to pull QA data. When we traced the access node, it linked back to a finance executive's account. That same department had been the loudest against my framework. Rachel stared at the screen. "This is more than sabotage. This is cover-up." "Yeah," I said quietly. "And they're not just protecting budgets. They're protecting each other." That night, I went home to my small apartment and poured a drink I didn't really want. The city outside hummed, neon lights reflecting off wet asphalt. I should have felt victorious, validated even. But instead, I felt the familiar weight settle in my chest. I'd spent my whole career holding everything together for people who'd rather let it break. And now that I was finally in control, the game hadn't changed, just the scale. Reliability, I realized, doesn't stop being a liability. It just becomes leverage. The following Monday, Rachel called an emergency meeting with corporate oversight. Janet Park joined remotely, her tone clipped and precise. "I've reviewed the data leaks," she said. "Finance is under internal review. If what you're suggesting is true, there could be a compliance breach." Rachel looked at me. "Sam's done the digging. He's got the proof." Janet nodded. "Then I want it formalized. Secure all evidence under QA chain of custody. And Mr. Carter, keep your guard up. You've disrupted more than a workflow." That last sentence lingered. Disrupted. Like a virus. I stayed late again that night. Not because I had to, but because I couldn't walk away from it. I opened my reliability map. All those red and blue lines blinking like nerve endings. Then I overlaid the access logs from the finance breach. The same pattern appeared. A hidden red line connecting departments that shouldn't have contact. Someone was feeding internal data between QA and finance, masked as budget reconciliation. And at the center of it, an old routing node registered to Shaw Consulting LLC. Elliot had set up a shell company, and it was still active. The next morning, I brought everything to Rachel. She didn't even sit down. "You realize what this means? He's still contracting under a third-party vendor. He's using his own company to siphon QA data. Which makes it corporate fraud, I said. She nodded slowly. "And we've got the proof." We decided to take it straight to Janet, but before we could schedule the meeting, something else happened. At 8:12 a.m., my phone buzzed with a message from Malik. "System alert. Someone's trying to wipe the finance. Servers. It's coming from inside HQ." I froze. Then a second message. "Backup protocols failing. They're nuking everything." Rachel and I sprinted to it. The room was chaos, alarms flashing, technicians shouting. On the monitors, lines of code scrolled faster than I could read. Someone was executing a full data purge under emergency authorization. I shouted over the noise, "Can you stop it?" Malik shook his head. "They've overridden admin control. It's wiping finance, HR, and QA shared drives." Rachel cursed under her breath. "They're burning the trail." My hands clenched at my sides. "Not all of it," I said. "I've got mirrored copies." Malik looked up. "You do?" I nodded. 2 physical drives. 1 off-site. We let the purge run its course. Watching years of digital history vanish in seconds was like watching a slow fire devour something you'd built by hand. When it was over, Malik turned to me. "You might be the only reason this company still has a record of what happened." I didn't say it out loud, but I knew he was right. For once, reliability had beaten destruction. By evening, HQ went into crisis mode. Corporate issued a blanket memo. Due to an internal system compromise, data access will be limited pending forensic investigation. Janet's office called Rachel directly. They wanted a secure copy of my mirrored drives delivered by hand. I agreed, but I made another copy first. Because if I'd learned anything, it was this. Truth without backup isn't truth at all. As I left the building that night, security lights flickering across the parking lot, I saw a familiar car parked near the exit, a black BMW with tinted windows. Elliot's old car. It pulled away slowly as I stepped outside. No plates visible, no faces, just a reminder. The game wasn't over yet. I got home, locked my door, and placed the mirrored drive on the table. It wasn't just data anymore. It was leverage, accountability, and survival rolled into one. They had tried to erase me, erase the workers, erase the truth. But reliability doesn't vanish. It remembers. And I wasn't done reminding them. The night before the board review, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the mirrored drive in front of me, the same way you'd sit with a loaded weapon you never wanted to use. The hum of the refrigerator filled the apartment. Outside, rain ticked softly against the window, steady as a clock. It felt poetic, almost cruel, that after years of being the guy who stayed late to keep the system clean, I was now holding the dirt that could collapse it entirely. I wasn't sure if I was ready to press send. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. I put on the same gray jacket I wore the day I first joined Thompson and Rayner, the one that still smelled faintly of machine oil and paper dust. It reminded me where I'd started, who I used to be before titles, before frameworks, before politics. Then I drove downtown, through streets slick with rain, headlights reflecting like restless eyes. When I reached headquarters, the guard at the lobby desk barely looked up before waving me through. My badge still carried the gold trim of a program lead, small, but enough to make people assume I belonged anywhere. And today that assumption would work in my favor. Janet Park was already waiting in the glass conference room when I arrived. She stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the city wake up through the fog. "Carter," she said, turning, "you've been busy." "I had help," I said. Rachel joined a minute later, eyes sharp, hair pulled into a no-nonsense knot. Malik followed quietly, holding a sealed envelope of printouts. Janet gestured toward the table. "Let's get this over with. Corporate's nervous, finance is in full lockdown. Someone's trying very hard to make this go away." "They almost succeeded," I said, placing the mirrored drive on the table. "That's every file they tried to erase. Access logs, shell company invoices, rerouted payments, QA manipulation scripts, all traced to Shaw Consulting." Janet blinked once slowly. "And it's verified?" Malik nodded. "Checksum matches. Every byte." Rachel looked at me. "You ready for what happens after this?" I gave a small smile. "For once, yeah." The meeting lasted 3 hours. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no confessions, just the kind of cold, administrative horror that comes when numbers tell a story more damning than words ever could. Every log showed how Elliot and 2 finance execs had created a shadow contract stream, diverting vendor payments through his consulting company. The total loss? Just shy of $3 million. And the kicker? The automation patches that had covered the trail were the same ones I'd written back when I worked under him, tweaked just enough to hide misuse under efficiency testing. He'd weaponized my own reliability against me. But I'd kept better records. Janet closed the folder and leaned back. "This is enough for federal inquiry," she said. "But before it leaves this room, I need to know your intent, Mr. Carter. Are you trying to expose or rebuild?" I looked down at my hands. The skin was rougher than I remembered. Years of keyboard strain, warehouse visits, ink smudges that never quite washed off. "I'm not here to burn it down," I said finally. "I just want the system to stop pretending it's clean." She nodded once. "Then let's clean it properly." By the end of the week, the board had issued a statement. Thompson and Rayner Logistics has identified irregularities in its financial reporting systems. The company is cooperating fully with federal authorities. Multiple employees have been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. No names were mentioned, but everyone knew. Elliot was gone. Federal subpoena delivered quietly to his suburban home. 2 finance executives resigned for personal reasons. HR purged every ghost account. The company that once dismissed me for being too reliable had just been saved by the same quality it tried to exploit. The fallout came with strange, silent rewards. Corporate promoted Rachel to Director of Process Integrity. Malik was made head of Systems Security. And me? Janet offered me a new position, Chief Reliability Officer. It sounded made up, and maybe it was, but it came with something real. Autonomy. "Your job," she said, "is to make sure what happened never happens again, not just in QA, across everything." I asked, "What happens when they stop listening again?" She smiled faintly. "Then you remind them who's keeping the lights on." The new role came with a bigger office, a new badge, and a different kind of quiet. The kind that follows power, not invisibility. But I still kept my old habits. I checked the small details. stayed late sometimes, walked the floors. One night, I visited the operations bay after hours. The hum of forklifts echoed faintly from the far end, and Luis, the same guy who'd complained months ago, was clocking out. He saw me and froze. "Mr. Carter, right?" "Just Sam," I said. "How's the workflow now?" He grinned. "Less guesswork. Management actually tracks who fixes what now. Even got a raise last month." I smiled. "That's how it should be." He nodded once before walking out into the night. That single conversation felt better than any memo. A few weeks later, Rachel dropped by my new office. She set a folder on my desk. "What's this?" "Final audit closure. You're officially off every report tied to the old fraud case." I exhaled, feeling something loosen inside me. She lingered by the doorway. "You did it, you know." "Did what?" "Prove that being reliable doesn't mean being silent." After she left, I sat there for a while, watching the city lights fade into dusk. The monitors hummed softly, and for once I didn't feel the urge to check another spreadsheet. I thought about my dad's old advice. Be the guy they can count on. He'd meant it kindly, but somewhere along the way, I'd learned the darker truth. Being countable means being expendable, unless you own the counting. Now finally, I did. That night, I took the long way home. I passed the old diner near the highway where I used to grab late-night sandwiches after overtime. The same neon sign still flickered above the door. I parked for a minute, listening to the rain hit the windshield. I realized something simple. Revenge hadn't been the point. The point was reclamation. I hadn't made their reliability a liability to punish them. I'd done it to remind myself that quiet strength still matters, that doing the right thing in the shadows doesn't mean you belong there forever. As I pulled onto the freeway, my phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "They're adding your framework company-wide next quarter. Congrats, Sam." I smiled, set the phone face down, and drove in silence. Somewhere behind me, in the building that used to define me, the system was still humming. More transparent, less cruel, a little more honest. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like part of the machinery. I felt like the engineer who finally rewired it. If this story moved you, subscribe for more real-life confessions and emotional journeys like this one.